Here on the show this evening. South Africa and Namibia are marking a major milestone in the pursuit of restorative justice and historical redress. The Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, together with the Iziko Museums of South Africa, Robben Island Museum, the South African Heritage Resources Agency, and their Namibian counterparts are overseeing the repatriation of the remains of Namibian freedom fighters, ancestral human remains, grave goods, and body casts that were removed during the colonial and apartheid eras. The ceremony represents more than the return of human remains and cultural artifacts. It's a step toward restoring dignity to individuals and communities whose humanity was violated through colonial exploitation and apartheid oppression. It also reflects ongoing efforts to confront painful chapters of history and strengthen relations between South Africa and Namibia. To take the conversation forward, we're joined on the line by Phumzile Zonke, who's Director of Advancement, Acting Director of Core Functions at the Iziko Museums of South Africa. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
A very good evening, Paul. Thank you very much for inviting me.
I mean, this is about much more than the return of remains, isn't it? What does this moment mean for the very families and communities whose ancestors are finally coming home?
It's a very important occasion, and it's an occasion that seeks to redress the ills of the past. It's an event of healing, and it's about bringing back dignity and connecting people or communities and society and the families at large that were affected by these injustices. And this is not just an exercise for the sake of doing what we think is politically correct. We are doing what we think is right. We are doing what we believe is long overdue. And as the Iziko Museums of South Africa as well, we are very that we've come this far, and we believe there's more to be done as well as we continue with doing this wonderful and this important activity.
And in doing what's right and what's long overdue, perhaps take us back a little bit, take us through the history of how these ancestral remains, grave goods and body casts ended up in institutions and museum collections in South Africa to begin with.
So if you look at the history, let me take it closer home. If you look at Iziko Museums of South Africa, this is an institution that is 200 years old, and during the colonial times, you will know that most of the research that was done, it was done in a manner that was quite racist. And there's something or some level of exploration that was classified as ethnographic or as anthropological racial theories that were exercised in really dehumanizing Black people, so to speak. And museums were instrumental in collecting such human remains through grave robbery or through collecting these human beings without consulting communities, without consulting families. And how that happened, it was done under the auspice of research and knowledge building. And at the time, it was deemed illegal. But over the years, we've come to understand that these are things that were unjust, and therefore that level of injustice is something that needed to be addressed. And therefore, as we reimagine the museums, as we reimagine the heritage sector, and as we reimagine our exhibitions as well, decisions are made by the institutions or by the museums themselves to say, you know what, how do we continue to make sure that as we build this new knowledge, but we do it in a manner that is quite transparent, that is quite consultative, that is also preserving the dignity of human beings at large.
And many
And
people may not be aware that Namibian freedom fighters were actually incarcerated here in South Africa on Robben Island. Who were these individuals? And perhaps just some information on the role they played in Namibia's liberation struggle.
yes, so we've got two individuals that have written their names, and I think they passed on, or they died respectively in 1974 and 1971. One is Simon Nilenge, and the other one is Fistas Nehale. So these were the political activists or the political prisoners who were buried or who died during those times, but where their graves were found somewhere here in Cape Town.
So the government says, the whole process is been described as one that is about rehumanizing those who were grossly violated. What does that mean on a practical and moral term as that process is set to get underway?
So I think if I could explain this in a practical term, what we are trying to do is that we need to move away from looking at human beings as objects, or as human beings as collection, or as human beings as specimens. And if you look at the colonial history that we come from, it objectified human beings. It stripped the dignity of human beings. Now, rehumanizing those collections and those remains, what we're suggesting, not suggesting, but what we're trying to do, we're trying to say, you know what, let's be more transparent as institutions. Let's be more consultative as institutions. Let's make sure that people connect with their loved ones. People know that what we consider collection, or what we consider as objects, this was a father, this was a brother, this was a sister, this was a human being, this was a member of society. Therefore, rehumanizing it, that means it's not about taking object from one museum to another museum. It's about making sure that you do a proper reburial. It's about making sure that you have a proper send-off. It's about making sure that the applicable rituals that happen based on each traditions when we want to rebury someone, those are observed and those are carried through consultation. And over and above that, we make sure that the communities as well, or the countries or the nations that are affected, also find space to heal, find space to reconcile, find space to connect. And that is some of the elements of this rehumanization that we are talking about. Yeah. These are not our objects, these are not collections. These are human beings that have lives, that lived and that had ambitions and visions, and they wanted to change their status quo at the time.
And are there still other ancestral remains or cultural artifacts held here in South African collections that could be returned to respective countries in the future?
Yes. So if I look at Iziko, for example, we have a number of collections, but the exact number it's not clear yet. But I know we still have to repatriate some of the remains to Colesberg. Not so long ago, we repatriated over roughly 63 ancestral remains of the Khoisan Sands to the Northern Cape. And we also recently did repatriate a few ancestral remains to Zimbabwe. So, however, as we continue to perform the audit and do the research and collect what is on our collections, and we continue, we're going to announce and make sure that what needs to be repatriated is repatriated accordingly to the respective countries and to the respective communities.
And for younger people, whether it's Namibians or South Africans just listening to get some insight on these returns, who may perhaps feel a bit of a disconnect from the history, what do you want them to understand about why this moment matters today in 2026?
Actually, it does touch a little bit on what I've mentioned earlier on, is that sometimes when you look at history, young people, they can think it's just characters in a book or in a
Yeah.
textbook. But those were real lives. Those are real stories. Those are real people. There's people who lived. There's people who had families. There's people who were important community members. And therefore, as we talk about repatriation, as we talk about rehumanization, as we talk about bringing back dignity, it's important to remember that the ills of the past still affect us today. And the decisions that we make today, or the legacy of what happened in the past, we might not have anything to do with that history, but we have everything to do with what we do with the legacy that emanates from that history, which informs the decisions that we make about what we want the future to be. We are of the belief that history is made every day, and also repatriating and rehumanizing and bringing back dignity affects everybody, affects how we treat one another, affect how we do business, affect how we carry ourselves, affect how we leave our legacy. Therefore, this is not just something for the oldies or people who just want to reminisce of the past, or people who just want to do this thing ceremonially, but the are lessons to be learned, that the bad things of the past that have happened have ripple effect and impacting people's lives today, and the descendants of those that were either persecuted or they were killed under the laws of the past. So when we say young people participate in political discussions, participate in the economy, participate in academia, make sure that you do things ethically. We are where we are because things were not done ethically in the past. We are where we are because things were done under certain laws, and people who also were affected challenge those laws, challenge the system, challenge the status quo. And we ask them to be active participants so that whatever that you are trying to address of the past is not repeated in the future.
And
so
finally, Phumzile, pardon that, before we let you go, just for the sake of time, what happens after the remains are returned to Namibia? Are there plans in terms of research development, educational programs? What is the process that will follow?
So from the Namibian side, I can't speak emphatically because there's a delegation that is responsible for that. The entire Department of Arts and Culture Office of Namibia has their own programs and process of what happens that side. But from this side of the end, the project doesn't end here. The project continues. We continue to find more remains that needs to be repatriated. We continue to make sure that we consult with the communities, we consult with the traditional leaders, because we want to do things right. We want to do things the correct way. But what happens from here? From tomorrow, we're gonna repatriate the remains to Namibia, but there are other ceremonies that will happen in Namibia in consultation with traditional leaders, with the families and the communities and the government on the other end.
Very well. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening and sharing that process and, of course, the insights that come with such a major milestone in the pursuit of restorative justice and historical redress. Speaking there to Phumzile Zonke, who's Director of Advancement, Acting Director of Core Functions at the Iziko Museums of South Africa.